Today, we're going to be making the oldest cocktail in the world. All right, so looking back in history, we kind of get a little bit messy, right? People were probably drinking the cocktails that they were likely writing about. So we go back to the early 1800s with this murky cocktail history. The word cocktail is being used a little bit more predominantly. The first cocktail that we're really seeing is the sling, a cocktail that consists of spirit, sugar, water. Eventually we get some bitters added to that, a little bit of that flavor and seasoning that we like to throw on top of some of our cocktails. That's where we get the bittered sling. That cocktail eventually evolves into people requesting cocktails being made the old-fashioned way. You guessed it. The bittered sling eventually evolved into the old-fashioned. So my preferred old-fashioned recipe looks a little something like this. I'm going to use 2 ounces of Rieger whiskey, 1 bar spoon of a 2-to-1 rich Demerara syrup, and then a few heavy dashes of both aromatic bitters and orange bitters to really set it off. We're going to mix all that up, pour it over a large rock, and garnish it with an orange twist and a cherry. So a truly beautiful drink, simple in preparation. Obviously back then they really didn't have a ton of stuff to work with, but I mean, it doesn't really get more classic than this. And while the old fashioned is becoming so popular, there's kind of a parallel story happening down south of New Orleans. And that's where we get the Sazerac. For this cocktail, we're gonna go all the way back to the 1830s, where Anton Peychaud has developed his own bitters and invented a cocktail called the Sazerac. Now, following a similar recipe for the bittered sling, we've got our spirit base, and in our case, we're going to be using some Rieger rye whiskey, some sugar, Peychaud's bitters, and a little absinthe spritz. So, you know, we're seeing a lot more layers added to some of these cocktails, but it really kind of shows you that there are 2 parallel evolutions happening really at the same time. So our preferred recipe for the Sazerac looks a little something like this. 2 ounces of Rieger rye whiskey, a bar spoon of rich Demerara syrup, many heavy dashes of Peychaud's bitters. I usually like to hit somewhere between 6 and 8. Sometimes I'm feeling a little frisky. I might add an optional, don't tell anybody in New Orleans, dash of Angostura bitters to really kind of punch through some of that baking spice. Once we mix all those ingredients together, we're gonna take an absinthe rinsed glass, strain our cocktail into it without ice, and garnish it with a little lemon twist. So for this cocktail, we obviously used a ton of Peychaud's bitters. The star anise and cherry that come through that really lay the groundwork for connecting not only the rye whiskey, but the absinthe rinse on the cocktail glass itself. Now, I know what you're thinking, but isn't absinthe illegal? That sounds like somebody who needs to hear our master distiller, Nathan Perry, talk a little bit more in depth about absinthe.